Hello everyone, my name's Anemone. I just wanted to kind of present something I've been working on here. For anyone that has met with me recently, you know that I have been very into Trench Crusade recently. Trench Crusade is sort of a tabletop skirmish war game, similar to things like Kill Team. It's set in a version of World War One, that sort of like style and theme, very grim dark. Mainly the verses of hell versus the forces of good, things like New Antioch, Trench Pilgrims, things like that. One of the things I love to do, and because I've spent so much time looking at all of the Trench Crusade stuff, is I love looking at some of the models that are a bit more underrepresented, or that don't see as much play, or some of the characters in lore that perhaps don't have models just yet because the game's very new, and using my background in game design a bit to flesh those out. And what I've done today is create a custom faction. This is the Corpus Mercatoria. So they are their own faction. The plan is to talk about these and go through them, talk about what some of their rules would be, talk about some of their units and some of their battle kit. As anything kind of homebrewed, I've always sort of erred on the side of them being a little underpowered, so if anything here is standing out as being a bit underpowered, that's probably why. Hopefully nothing stands out as being too overpowered, but we shall see. I've not had the opportunity to get these guys on the table just yet. This video primarily is going to be for the people in my kind of local play group to see these guys and sort of get an idea for them. So we'll walk through these and we should have them all introduced for you. So who are they? What is the Corpus Mercatoria about? So with most of the factions in the game, they're usually either a faction of good or a faction of evil. The Corpus would be a neutrally aligned faction. They're going to prioritize science above anything else, more so, and making money and commerce and things like that. So these guys wouldn't necessarily side with one side or the other. They have their own patrons. They don't worship the good or evil patrons as are already sort of established in the game, the forces of evil or the forces of good. They primarily sell and trade collected biological materials. So whilst they're on the battlefield, they will be harvesting sort of biomass and biological material, and they will sell this on. They're kind of scavengers, really. So similar to the Knights of Avarice, that they kind of want to scavenge gear, but instead of trying to look pretty and look the best they can, like the Knights of Avarice, these guys are looking to just make money and investigate anything they can and research anything they can. So yeah, at the bottom, they seek to create the most powerful weapons to sell to the highest bidder through ruthless field testing. So one of the units we'll look at later on is kind of one of these things that they've created that they would perhaps sell to the highest bidder given the opportunity. So let's talk about their patrons. They've got two patrons, similar to many other factions. The first is the Grand Design. The Grand Design is a semi-divine concept of a perfect organism that hasn't yet to be achieved. So whilst they're experimenting, they're constantly pushing towards this idea that they sort of worship, this perfect organism that hasn't been achieved just yet, but they're hoping through ruthless testing, through the fact that there's all these wars going on, they can use that as an opportunity to push towards this perfect organism. The other is the Prophet Saint, who is a darkly revered figure who first proved flesh could be traded like currency. This may be stories and rumours of someone who was alive, and those stories and rumours have been passed down and is now a revered figure to the Corpus units, or it could be fictional stories that have passed their way down to this almost mythical point that this character is now worshipped among these units. So lots of factions have sort of general faction rules that encompass the entire faction. Some that come to mind are like the Naval Raiders having their +1 to sprint, or the Black Grail having -1 to their injury rolls. We're going to have a look at some of the Corpus's faction rules. This will be the ones that affect them on the board, as well as potentially when you're creating a warband for them. So the first one is they have an open hire of Combat Biologists. So this is really the unit that sort of inspired this whole thing. You will have seen it throughout the slides, and you will continue to see it as we go forward. But I feel the Combat Biologist is a unit that I don't see at all. People don't take it. The Observers is the same price. That might change with an update coming soon, but currently the Observer is the same price, and I think lots of people opt for that over the Combat Biologist, which is a shame because I think this unit is really interesting, and I think that the model is really cool, but we just don't see it whatsoever. So the plan was with these guys is similar to how Knights of Avarice can hire Warlocks for a ducat cost. These guys can hire Combat Biologists for 50 ducats and not pay the glory cost. The trade-off is that they don't get the normal kit. So by standard, Combat Biologists come with gas grenades, standard armor, and a proprietary melee weapon, the Vivisector, which we'll come back to in a bit later on. But you would just hire these as a unit. They would get their rules, but they wouldn't get any of that specific kit that they normally get. Mercantile contracting. So this is a bit of flavour. It says not all contracts are paid for in cash. The Corpus Mercatoria may select one weapon from another faction's armory and include it in their warband. So this is similar to some of the other factions that can steal weapons. These guys can steal one weapon. So it would essentially be they could have Siege Giselle or the heavy shotgun from New Antioch, or something that helps fill out their roster a bit. It would always be restricted, similar to how those other factions work, where if it's something like the Tartarus Claws that can only go on a Death Commando, this faction doesn't get Death Commandos, so they can take those, but they wouldn't be able to use them, so there would be no point. But stealing something like a heavy shotgun, Siege Giselle, is probably quite beneficial. Field of Study. So this is one of the main defining factors of this warband, this faction, is that when you create the warband, similar to when you create a Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent warband, you will pick a field of study. I've gone for 3, chemistry, biology and physics, so they're not full 7 like Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, but each of these, depending on which you pick, will tailor how they play a little bit. You'll get access to some field of study specific battle kit, and you will get some special rules based on which one you go for. So we're going to go through each one now and have a look at some of the special rules for each field of study. So the first one is chemistry. Chemical reconfigure. This is the first rule for models that are in a chemistry warband. A model may take a transmute action during its activation. When it does, it may select one weapon with the blast keyword it is equipped with and attempt to alter the payload of that weapon. Roll a success check. If successful, roll one of the following choose one of the following effects for that weapon's blast attacks until the end of the activation. So this could be anything: gas grenades, grenade launchers, frags, incendiaries, whatever battle kit they have access to. You can take one of these rolls to attempt to alter the payload before throwing it. So like they're just mixing up a quick chemical concoction, they can change something and then throw the weapon. Obviously they can fail this, so they may be stuck with whatever they had before. If you fail the roll, you just go back to whatever you had. So if you had a gas grenade, you're throwing it at someone who is wearing a gas mask or is a black grail, so they're immune to gas effects. You might want to change it to a fire weapon. You can take a transmute action. You may fail it, but if you're successful, you get a fire grenade and you can throw that at the enemy. It then retains whatever effect you've changed it to until you make that roll again. Chemical conditioning. So this is the second rule for chemical faction, the chemical field of studies. No test subjects are more reliable than themselves. When building a Corpus Mercatoria warband, you may purchase the following experimental drugs. This isn't correct at the moment. Most of the drugs are limited to 2 uses per warband, and a model may only benefit from 1 drug at a time. There is 1 drug that is limited to 1 use, which we'll have a look at here. The first one is the Adrenal Surge. It costs 10 ducats. You can have 2 copies of this. It adds 2 inches to the model's movement characteristic. We've got some good melee weapons in this warband, and we've got some models that benefit from being in melee, so an extra bit of movement helps get them in. Similarly, the Dread Nullification Serum, similar to, I think it's an Iron Capriote for the Trench Pilgrims. You can buy this and it will give you Negate Fear. And finally, the one that is limited to 1 is the 10 ducat costing Euphoria tablets. While this model is alive and not down, you gain +1 to your morale checks. I didn't want to be able to have multiple copies of this, and you can stack them up and it gets tricky to do a morale check and difficult to close out a game, so that was limited to 1. So moving on, we've got the biology field of study. Clinical intervention. So clinical intervention says models from the biology field of study treat battlefield medicine as a standardized procedure. Models with the biology field of study gain the treat action keyword. When they perform a treat action, it is not a risky success roll. So treat, if you're not familiar, is a keyword that's currently on the medikit. It essentially says you can make a risky success roll, and if you're successful, you can either remove 1 blood marker from someone who's within 1 inch of you, or stand up a friendly model that is down. So a biology field of study model can always do the action without purchasing a medikit, and it's not risky, so they can gamble on doing that. They can take that roll without it potentially ending their activation. Corpus harvest, which I just noticed I've spelled wrong there. When within 1 inch of a downed enemy model, a Corpus Mercatoria model may take a harvest action. Make a risky success roll, so this one is risky. If you fail, the model's activation ends immediately, as standard for you. All, I think, risky success rolls. If you succeed, you gain a harvest point for the rest of the battle, which can be recorded off the board somewhere. At the end of the game, each harvest point may be converted into 5 ducats, which are added immediately to your arsenal. An enemy model cannot be harvested more than once per model. So if they've got a yeoman, a lieutenant, and a heavy infantry, if each one of those is knocked down, you can harvest them for biomass, but once each one have been harvested, you can't re-harvest them. So if the heavy mechanized infantry goes down, you harvest it, it gets knocked down later on, you can't harvest it again to kind of stack up hundreds and hundreds of ducats that you can stash away for another game. If you've got 7 models on the field, the most ducats you could get is 35. So there is a limit, and the likelihood of you downing each one of their units and being within 1 inch and making a risky success roll is astronomically low. So this is hopefully just to give you a little bit of a boost, maybe buy you a weapon each game, but nothing crazy. And finally, we have physics. So trajectory correction. Models with the physics field of study exert subtle control over projectile motion. Grenade weapons used by models of this field of study gain +1 success dice. I'm much happier with this rule now that the changes to grenades are coming out. I knew I wanted physics to interact with grenades in some way. I was worried with the grenades in their current state with making it too strong. So I'm happy with the nerf that this is an acceptable change. Obviously this doesn't compound with being able to change things like the payload, because that's a chemistry ability. So if you've got a gas grenade, you just get a +1 to throwing it. We've got low range modifiers across the board. Normally the Combat Biologist, I think, is just +1 melee. So he would just go to a +1 for throwing whatever grenade he has if he's a physics unit. And charge inertia. Scientists of physics treat movement as stored energy that can be harvested at the moment of impact. If a model with the physics field of study moves into contact with an enemy as a result of a charge, it gains +1 injury die to its first melee roll against that enemy this activation. This bonus only applies to the first attack generated from that contact. So if you have 2 trench clubs, the first swing with the trench club gets a +1 injury die, the second one would not. We've got some big units, we've got a particularly big unit later on that loves being in melee, has some bonuses to charging as well, so hopefully he's particularly beneficial for a physics unit, physics warband that can compound that effectiveness with this rule as well. So let's have a look at some of the units. I've put some models on screen of ones I found that I think are similar to kind of the image I had in my head when I was writing these up, so they're a bit of inspiration. If it's one I've taken from somewhere, I've put a reference to it if you want to go and find that model for whatever reason. But let's have a look at the leader of the Corpus Mercatoria. So the leader is our chief anatomist. This is a model from Wargame's crew. He has a 6-inch movement, +2 to melee, +1 to range, costs 80 ducats, and has no armor as a default. He is our leader. He is an elite, obviously. He has a negate gas innately, negate fear, and tough. So similar to sort of a heretic priest or something like that, just instead of having strong as a keyword, he has a slightly worse range statistic, but gets negate fear instead. So he's a bit more melee focused, but you can alter that again. If you're something like physics, you get +1 to throwing grenades and things. So there are ways to bump up that range statistic as well if you wanted to play them as a slightly more range focused army or warband. So he's got 2 abilities. The first one is biomass repurposing. When this model takes another model completely out of action, it may remove up to 2 blood markers from itself or units within 1 inch. So this is similar to the Corpse Guard from Black Grail, that when it puts a blood marker on, it can take a blood marker off. This is a bit more all or nothing, where if it takes a model out of action, it can take 2 off of itself to really kind of swing stuff in its favour. So it wants to, it's not worried about necessarily getting charged, because it can take some blood markers on itself. Then when it retaliates, maybe it has been stripped of its tough, but when it retaliates, it can get those blood markers off of itself and keep going. The second ability is Pass Me the Scalpel. This model may use the melee weapons of friendly models within 1 inch of itself to make melee attacks, as though the weapon is equipped on itself. So you may find that he stood next to a larger unit that's carrying something quite strong. He could then use that to make a melee attack without having the penalties for using a heavy weapon or carrying around a heavy weapon. The guy next to him might just have a better melee weapon than you've equipped this guy with, so he could then borrow that to make melee attacks with, so long as he's in 1 inch of that model as well. So lots of times with these units, it's quite good to have 2 units next to each other in a melee combat, because they can support each other through either a little bit of healing or supporting each other by passing weapons around, things like that. The second unit, another one of our elites, is the Merchant of Flesh. This is a model from Cursed Clayworks. 6 inch movement, infantry, +1 melee, and +1 ranged. He's a 70 ducat model. He's got elite, so he's able to get advancements and experience and things like that, and has the negate gas keyword innately as well. Where others see loss and trauma, the Merchant of Flesh sees inventory, moving through the aftermath of war to secure what can be sold to the highest bidder. So this is sort of leaning into that fantasy of the guy who goes around collecting all of this scraps of the war, whether it's people or weapons or whatever, to sell it on to make money and to fund their science and keep pushing forward with their goals. So the abilities for these guys look something like this. The first one is Blood Contracts. The flesh of some is worth more than others. At the start of the game, select one type of enemy model. So you could say, I'm going to pick Yeoman for this game, or they're playing Knights of Avarice, so they've got 5 Anointed lined up. You could say, I'm going to pick Anointed. Attacks by that Merchant of Flesh have +1 success dice against that class of model. So they're his prize targets for the game. If your opponent has really specced into one unit, you can say you're going to pick that model to put pressure on them. Or they've got one model that's particularly strong that you want to put some extra pressure on. You can say you're going to target that model and have +1 success dice against it. You may want to mark those models with some sort of token or something, just so you remember that as you're playing. The second ability, and this is more of a campaign focused one, is Strip for Parts. If during a game where you fielded the Merchant of Flesh, a troop or elite on the enemy team is killed permanently during the trauma step, you may add one piece of its gear to your arsenal that is 20 ducats or less. You may choose one unit per game to loot. So if your opponent has a yeoman, that yeoman dies, he's got a bolt action, you can strip that bolt action off of them. If I was to fill this out properly, there'd probably be some caveats here about you can't loot faction-specific gear, and you can probably do a trade-off for cash or something for the actual ducat value or something. But just for now, that's the sort of idea there, is that he can take weapons and keep them for himself up to that ducat threshold, so you can't loot a flipping Grand Sultanate cannon off of someone and stick it on one of your units and carry it around, because it would be too expensive. And our final elite is the Corpus Toxicologist. He's a 60 ducat model, a bit more of a ranged unit. He's a 6 inch movement, 0 melee, +1 ranged, and no armor. He's an elite, so he can gain experience. His ability is Reactive Compounds. If the target of this model's ranged attacks already has at least 1 blood marker, you gain +1 success dice, so he can go up to 2. So he's about kind of pushing that advantage a little bit. If someone's already got blood markers, maybe they've put blood markers on themselves in some way, or maybe it's Red Brigade and you've put some blood markers on at the start, you can really kind of push that advantage with this model by targeting them and putting as many blood markers on as you can by having a slightly boosted success dice roll. Each shot from their neurotoxin rifle is a controlled exposure, introducing carefully measured compounds into enemy troops for observation and documentation. So one of the weapons coming up later is particularly thematically tailored to these guys, being the dart rifle. So the Combat Biologist, this is a unit that is already in the game, but we would be able to recruit them for 50 ducats. Saying here the base cost is 70, I don't know where that's from on the image there. But normally they are 3 glory typically. So it's a 6-inch move, +1 to melee, no range statistic, and they wouldn't have any armor. On the image there it says -1 because that's the statistic of the actual model in game. Normally when we recruit them in this army they would have no armor. They get negate gas and negate fear, and they're not elite because this is our first troop model. So the abilities of the Combat Biologist, this is what they get currently in the game. They would get these abilities when you recruit them, they just wouldn't get any of their battle kit. So the Combat Biologist says, when a Combat Biologist takes any enemy model with the keyword demonic or black grail out of action with a melee attack, place 1 blessing marker beside the Combat Biologist. So that's quite a good ability. It gives them a bit more opportunity to, when they kill something, to again keep pressing that advantage. The second ability is Battlefield Vivisection with their Vivisector weapon that they've got there. Whenever a Combat Biologist is part of your warband, which it pretty much always will be for this troop, because these guys are kind of our main rank and file, add the Gather Knowledge Glorious Deed to those normally available to you in each scenario you play. Gather Knowledge says you complete this Glorious Deed if 3 or more enemy models are taken out of action while they are within 1 inch of a friendly Combat Biologist. So again, that's that sentiment of having this unit next to another unit. Maybe it's your leader and they go around together killing guys together. They can heal each other a little bit, they can support each other a little bit, and it's going to get you closer to that Gather Knowledge Glorious Deed, which is then going to support them through a campaign. We have the Field Aid here. It's a great model here from Great Grimoire. They are the cheap 30 ducat units. This is our standard kind of chaff unit, similar to a Wretched, similar to a Yeoman, something like that. So they have a 6-inch move. They have a -1 to melee. They have a standard range statistic and no armor. They have an assist procedure ability. Assist procedure says when within 1 inch of a friendly Corpus Mercatoria model, that model gains +1 dice for melee or ranged attacks that it makes. That effect does not stack, so you can't just have 4 of them stood around your leader and push him in, and he's got +4 to everything he's doing, +6 with his own abilities, and he's just going around killing everything. It only is 1. This is sort of inspired by the Defenders of the Iron Wall, which get the +1 when they're firing siege gazelles with someone next to them to support them, so these guys can follow your units around. Maybe you don't want to kit them out too much because they're squishy and they don't have much going on themselves. They've got the -1 melee, but they are going to follow your units around and help them. So field aids accompany the Corpus Mercatoria into active engagements carrying instruments and samples while ensuring procedures are carried out with minimal delay or waste. Next up we have the Contracted Security. So this is our strong unit here. They are 70 ducats. They're a 6-inch move, +1 to melee and +1 to ranged with 0 default armor statistic. So again, this is our sort of foil for heavy mechanized infantry or like an anointed. So they've got strong, negate heavy, they're a Corpus Mercatoria unit. They have the ability Security Detail, so these guys would be dispatched alongside the scientists to keep them safe. Security Detail says when a model within 1 inch is targeted by an attack and a success roll is passed, you may instead state that this model is the target for that injury roll. So this is a ability similar to the Black Grail's Corpse Guards, where they can just essentially take that hit for them. So you may want to load these guys up on armor, save those ducats on armor for your Combat Biologist or Chief Anatomist or whoever it is, and send one of these guys around with them, being security for that guy. Even if this Contractor Security gets kills as well, he's going to help you bump towards that Gather Knowledge Glorious Deed as well. Contractor Security operatives are hired muscle employed by the Corpus Mercatoria to ensure that valuable personnel and assets survive long enough to justify their investment. And finally, our big centerpiece model is the Grand Experiment. He's 100 ducats, similar to things like the Brazen Bull. He's got a 6-inch move, he's got +2 to melee, he has a default 0 range statistic, and no armor by default. He has the keywords Fear, Strong, Negate Heavy, Tough, Artificial, and he is a Corpus Mercatoria unit. So the Grand Experiment is the culmination of Corpus Mercatoria's ambition. This is the closest they've got to that sort of grand design that they were pushing for. They are a heavily modified subject encased in a containment hazmat suit, refined through layers of surgical and chemical intervention. So the abilities for these guys, these are obviously a melee focused kind of bruiser unit, and this is the one I was talking about that pairs quite nicely with physics teams. They've got the Overloaded Physiology ability, which says once this model finishes a charge action, make an injury roll for all models it finishes within 1 inch of. So that's friendly or foe, so maybe don't have them go barreling into a combat that you've got a bunch of combat biologists and field aides stood around, because they're going to get splattered as well. But it does pair nicely with that bonus to charging that physics warbands got earlier. They have chemical resilience as well. The first time each round this model would receive a blood marker, you can ignore it. If during this instance it would get 2 at once, instead gain just 1. So if you throw a Molotov at him and he doesn't have fire protection, he would get just 1 rather than the 2 that he would get for normally being hit by a fire weapon. If you shoot him with a bolt action and you roll a 5 and it's just a blood, then he doesn't get any blood marker at all for the first instance of a round. So if you shoot him with a machine gun, first one that hits him is nothing, then the next 2 hit him, you might get some blood that way. This is just to keep him alive a bit longer. He's an expensive model, similar to the artificial life defense rule that's like -1 injury for stuff like the Brazen Bull. This is this guy's way of staying alive a bit longer. It makes it a bit more difficult to build up to a bloodbath to kill him. Okay, so with that, let's have a look at some of the battle kit that's available to these guys, things you can kit them out with to flesh them out. They would probably have access to the standard sort of new Antioch style weapons, things like bolt actions and shotguns and automatic shotguns and things like that, but these are extra ones that are added in that are a bit more flavorful to the Corpus Mercatoria. The first one I mentioned earlier, is the dart rifle. It's got a 24-inch range, it's a 2-handed weapon, and it costs 20 ducats. It has a bayonet lug as its keyword, and it does have an ability here that's in the lore section at the bottom there that says neurotoxic. If the dart rifle applies a blood marker but the model remains standing, you may move that model d3 inches in any direction. It cannot finish that move within 1 inch of an enemy model. So you may risk shooting into a combat here to move someone out, which would let you get an opportunity attack. You may use it to have someone come out from behind a wall that lets you then get some extra attacks on. It may let you throw a grenade with the weapon changes that have come out now. It may give someone line of sight. It may give someone the ability to make a charge that they couldn't previously because the model was out of line of sight. As well, we have the auto syringe pistol here, which is a 10 ducat pistol with a 12-inch range. It's got the pistol keyword, so you can use it in melee, and it's got shrapnel as a keyword, so a bit like the I think it's the Alibozin. I'm probably not saying that right, but it's like a shotgun thing from the Iron Sultanate that has shrapnel. This is a pistol that has it as well, but it's a bit more expensive because you can use it in melee. And then we've got the incision beams. This is like a cutting rifle that they'd use for breaking up bodies and harvesting biomass. It's an 18-inch range rifle. It's two-handed, costs 15 ducats, and it has armor piercing 1. So this is basically the infested rifle from Black Grail that you normally stick on things like the Herald of Beelzebub. This basically, if an opponent's got a -2 armor, it brings them down to a -1. If they've got -1, it brings them down to no armor. So it helps you cut through armor a little bit. The Vivisector, and this is a weapon that the combat biologists start with. Typically, you would have to pay for it for 20 ducats in this army, but anyone can get access to it. This is very wordy, but I'll break it down and make it simple. The first one is Pain Amplifier. Essentially, you lower the roll you need to get a crit for each blood marker that's on there. So if you've got 3 blood on there, typically you have to roll a 12. You can minus that 3 from 12, and that's what you have to roll instead. You can scale that up and down based on how many blood they've got. The second rule is Inflict Pain. When you hit someone with it, and the unit is not taken down, you can again move them D3 in a straight line. This does open you up for opportunity attacks, but that opportunity attack doesn't stack. You can't keep divvying it if you hit them again, but it is a good way to kind of inflict multiple wounds and keep pressing that attack. Melee weapons, this is some Corpus specific melee weapons here that aren't already in the game. The first one is Harvest Hooks. Harvest Hooks Harvest Hooks cost 10 ducats. They're a one-handed melee weapon with critical, and they have the special word that enemies models within 1 inch of a model equipped with the Harvest Hook cannot take a retreat action, so they sort of embed in you, similar to a Goetic Warlock grabs you and you can't move. If you're next to one of these models, you can't run away from them, so the Harvest Hooks might hold you down whilst someone else is hitting you. Obviously that's can't take a retreat action, so if someone else hits you with a Vivisector, you will move away. If someone else shoots you with a Neurotoxin rifle, you will move away. You can be puppet mastered away, anything like that. The second, a bit of a cheaper option, is just a Scalpel. These again have that armor piercing 1 rule for 5 ducats, so this is just to help kind of cut through some of that armor, because we have nothing with ignore armor specifically, so this just helps break some of that down a little bit. It helps you get through particularly heavily armored units. So let's look at some chemistry specific battle kit. The Corrosive Sprayer, this is a 30 ducat flamethrower, 2-handed with an 8-inch range. This weapon, despite not being blast, is able to be changed through the transmute effect. So it's a flamethrower, it's gas by default, but you can change it to fire or even shrapnel based on what you need. This is one of their only weapons with ignore armor. I think this would replace their flamethrower, so a chemistry warband wouldn't have ignore armor through having the flamethrower, they would have it through having this weapon. The Injector Blade, which is 10 ducats, this is a one-handed melee, and it essentially can be transmuted as well. It's got gas, so it would apply to blood markers if they don't have a gas mask, but you can change it to whatever you need. So if you're against Black Grail, you can take those rolls to go into fire. If you're against an army that's gone for masks rather than helmets, you can go into shrapnel and swing that way. Biology, let's have a look at some of the biology battle kit. So the Hemo Siphoner, this is a 12 ducat 18-inch rifle, it's 2-handed. This is the ability Blood Coagulation. This weapon can be used to make a ranged attack on a friendly model. If the roll is a success, you can remove 1 blood marker from them, so you can essentially use it as a healing weapon rather than a damaging weapon, but it can also be used to siphon blood out of your opponents in a negative way and do damage that way. So just one for physics there. I think I may have skipped a slide, but this is the physics rifle. The physics rifle here is called the Vector Rifle. It's a 15 ducat rifle. It's 24-inch range. It's 2-handed and it's got the ignore cover, so I imagine this is shooting, and it's through physics they're pinging shots off walls, around trench corners and through buildings, so it lets you ignore cover. This basically just means that you're not susceptible to the -1 that cover would give you. So if you're against a unit that's got a lot of cover, maybe you're playing against a heavy mechanized infantry and they've all got the huge shields that are giving them cover, this lets you ping shots around to ignore that. You still need line of sight, but it would let you get some extra cheeky shots in if they're half covered by a wall or if they're in a building or something like that. The second weapon for the physics guys is the Kinetic Hammer. This is a 20 ducat hammer. In my mind this is similar to sort of a anti-tank hammer, that sort of range. So it's a 2-handed weapon. This would probably be heavy. I've not put heavy on the keywords, but it should be heavy. It's heavy, +1 injury dice, risky, and critical. This weapon has stored power. If you charge this activation, so it synergizes with the ability that physicians have already, successful attacks made with this weapon knock the target back 3 inches. This does not trigger an opportunity attack, but it would set you up next turn to get another charge off on that unit, which will then let you stack up these abilities again, get some of those buffs. So let's look at some of the just generic equipment. So the portable lab kit here is 20 ducats. This is similar to the Golden Calf altar, where it's a heavy item. You give it to a strong unit, they can carry it into battle and set it up somewhere during the game. It then puts out an 8-inch aura around it, and models that activate within that 8-inch aura shed one of their blood markers so it lets them heal a little bit. Maybe you put it down if you're doing the train mission and you're on the embankment and you want to shed some blood markers that way, or you're playing some sort of King of the Hill or something, or holding down a building that's particularly important. You can set it up in there and you can shed blood markers once you activate those models. And finally, we've got the hazmat suit. This is an 8 ducat bit of equipment similar to like the Iron Capriote from Trench Pilgrims. It gives you access to negate fire and negate gas. Lots of our models have negate gas by default anyways, because they're all walking around in hazmat suits and gas masks, but this gives you an opportunity to stack up some of that for a little bit of a cheaper cost than something like an Infernal Brand Mark and a gas mask would cost together. It's just a little bit of an extra supplement to these guys to help them out. So that's everything for the Corpus Mercatoria. That's the last bit of equipment. If I played these guys in the campaign, because I'm playing with friends and they're happy for me to do that, maybe I would go on to look at some glory items or something. But please do let me know what you think. Please, any feedback on this would be great. I'm going to play test these guys a little bit with some players locally to me, and if there's anything that's standing out as incredibly overtuned or undertuned, then I'd probably come back through. But as a first pass, these are some of my ideas for a custom faction, the Corpus Mercatoria for Trench Crusade. Thank you for listening.